You're not lazy. You're not stupid. You're not broken. And that's exactly why this is so dangerous. Because the middle-class trap doesn't catch failures. It catches the disciplined, the responsible, the people who did what they were told. You went to school. You showed up on time. You worked hard. You stayed consistent. And yet, something feels off. You're tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Busy in a way progress doesn't follow. Stable, but never ahead. You're doing everything right, so why are you still stuck? This audiobook exists to answer that question. Not with motivation, not with hustle slogans, not with fantasies of overnight success, but with the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Because the middle-class trap isn't about poverty. It's about just enough comfort to keep you compliant. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. In this audiobook, The Middle-Class Trap, you're going to discover why hard work alone was never meant to make you free, how security became the most expensive illusion of all, and why the system rewards obedience far more reliably than it rewards intelligence. You'll learn how people get trapped not by bad decisions, but by reasonable ones. And before we go any further, let's make one thing clear. This is not an attack on jobs. This is not an attack on stability. This is not an attack on responsibility. This is an attack on invisible ceilings. Because the middle-class trap is subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It says, be grateful. Don't risk it. At least you're doing better than most. And those words slowly shrink your ambition. Here's the first brutal truth. The system does not punish hard work. It contains it. Hard work makes you dependable, predictable, replaceable. Hard work without leverage makes you safe, but never free. And safety feels good until you realize it comes with a price. That price is time. You trade hours for income. You trade energy for certainty. You trade your best years for stability you never fully own. And because the trade feels reasonable, you accept it. Most people never question the deal. They just try to optimize it. A raise here, a promotion there, a slightly bigger house, a slightly nicer car. But the structure stays the same, and that structure is the trap. You don't fall into it, you graduate into it. You are rewarded for playing by the rules, then slowly punished for believing they lead somewhere. Now listen carefully. The middle-class trap is not about income. There are people earning six figures who are deeply trapped. There are people earning less who are far freer. The trap is about dependency. When your entire life depends on one stream of income, one employer, one schedule, one set of expectations, you are not secure. You are fragile, and fragility creates fear. Fear keeps you compliant. Fear keeps you busy. Fear keeps you grateful instead of curious. This is why so many people feel stuck but can't explain why. They're not failing. They're surviving successfully. And survival, dressed up as success, is the most dangerous illusion of all. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If you stopped working for 6 months, what would collapse first? Your lifestyle? Your identity? Your sense of worth? If the answer scares you, that's not weakness. That's awareness waking up. Because freedom is not about how much you earn. It's about how many choices you actually have. And most people in the middle class have fewer choices than they realize. They have commitments disguised as achievements, obligations disguised as milestones, golden handcuffs disguised as rewards. And the longer you stay, the heavier they become. Now here's where this audiobook diverges from everything you've heard before. I'm not going to tell you to quit your job. I'm not going to sell you a dream. I'm not going to promise escape without effort. What I'm going to do is show you the structure. Because once you understand the structure, you stop blaming yourself. And once you stop blaming yourself, you can actually change. This journey will move through 5 phases. First, we'll expose the trap, how it's built, why it works, and who it benefits. Then, we'll dismantle the myth of hard work and explain why effort without leverage caps your life. Next, we'll explore how the wealthy think in systems while the middle class is trained to think in tasks. Then, we'll talk about risk, what it actually is and why avoiding it is far riskier than you were taught. And finally, we'll rebuild, not with fantasies, but with clarity. By the end of this audiobook, you won't feel hyped. You'll feel oriented. And orientation is what changes lives quietly, permanently, and without applause. If this resonates already, don't rush. Just stay, because the next chapter reveals something most people never admit. The middle class isn't trapped by poverty. It's trapped by comfort, and comfort, when it replaces growth, becomes a cage. Dear viewer, share your success story even if it is small. It can motivate other people to visit the comment section and read it, and it can inspire them. Also, don't be shy about asking questions, and perhaps someone with more experience or someone who has been through this will share the answer. Remember, it is only through communication that people become stronger and better. Thank you. Chapter 2. How Comfort Became a Weapon. Comfort was never meant to trap you. It was meant to protect you, but somewhere along the way, protection turned into containment, and the middle-class trap was perfected. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The system doesn't need you to fail. It only needs you to stay comfortable enough to never rebel. Comfort is quiet. It doesn't hurt enough to demand change. It doesn't excite enough to demand growth. It numbs. You wake up, you commute, you work, you scroll, you sleep, repeat. And because nothing is terribly wrong, you stay. This is how the trap tightens without resistance. The middle class is not poor. It's not desperate. It's not broken. It's sedated. Sedated by routines. Sedated by predictability. Sedated by the idea that stability equals success. But stability without progress is decay. Now let's talk about how this was engineered. From a young age, you were trained to value certainty. Good grades lead to good jobs. Good jobs lead to stable income. Stable income leads to security. Risk was framed as recklessness. Obedience was framed as maturity. You weren't taught how money actually works. You were taught how to qualify for it. You weren't taught leverage. You were taught compliance. And compliance is extremely profitable for everyone except you. Here's a sentence that should unsettle you. The system doesn't reward those who create the most value. It rewards those who create the least disruption. If you are reliable, you are valuable. If you are predictable, you are promotable. If you don't question structure, you are safe to invest in. This is why hard workers often stay stuck. They become too useful where they are, too dependable to replace, too productive to promote out of position, too necessary to free. And slowly, without realizing it, you optimize yourself into a ceiling. Now let's talk about lifestyle, because this is where the trap becomes personal. As your income increases, so do your commitments. Better apartment, better car, better phone, better subscriptions, better expectations. Each upgrade feels earned. Each upgrade feels deserved. and each one quietly increases your dependency. Your expenses rise to meet your income. Your income rises to meet your obligations. And suddenly, you're not working to build a future. You're working to maintain a lifestyle. That's when freedom disappears, not in one dramatic moment, but gradually, responsibility by responsibility, payment by payment, expectation by expectation. This is why so many people feel trapped but can't explain why. They didn't make bad decisions. They made reasonable ones. And reasonable decisions, repeated long enough, create invisible prisons. Now, let's address a painful myth. You just need to work harder. Harder than what? Harder than who? Hard work inside a capped system only makes the cap more efficient. You don't escape a cage by running faster inside it. You escape by understanding where the walls are. And the middle-class trap hides the walls behind comfort. Now let's talk about time. Time is the real cost of comfort. You trade decades for predictability. You trade flexibility for certainty. You trade upside for safety. And the trade is subtle because the paycheck arrives regularly. The benefits feel reassuring. The routine feels normal until one day you look up and realize you're older, more experienced, more tired, but not meaningfully freer. And that realization hurts more than struggle ever did. Now here's something almost no one admits. The middle-class trap is powered by fear of loss, not desire for gain. Fear of losing income, fear of losing status, fear of disappointing others, fear of starting over, and fear keeps you locked in place. You don't need to be controlled with force when you can be controlled with fear. Now, let's pause for a moment. If this feels uncomfortable, that's intentional. Awareness always feels destabilizing before it feels empowering. You're not being attacked. You're being unhooked. Because the moment you see comfort clearly, it loses its power over you. Comfort is not evil, but comfort without direction is deadly. Now, here's the question that matters. If you removed fear from the equation, what would you do differently? Not what would you quit? Not what would you abandon? What would you build? That question is dangerous to the system and transformative to you. In the next chapter, we're going to dismantle the biggest lie of all, the belief that hard work automatically leads to wealth. Because once that illusion breaks, you'll finally understand why so many people do everything right and still never get ahead. And once you understand that, you'll never look at effort the same way again. Dear viewer, we strive to create high-quality videos for you. Please assist us in improving our efforts by commenting on what you like about the video and what you would change or add. We would be very grateful. Chapter 3. Why hard work hits a ceiling. Hard work feels virtuous. It feels honest. It feels deserved. It feels like the one thing no one can take from you. And that's exactly why this truth hurts. Hard work is rewarded up to a limit. After that, it becomes a liability. Not because effort is bad, but because effort on its own does not scale. The middle-class trap is built on this misunderstanding. You were taught that effort equals outcome, that persistence guarantees progress, that if you just keep pushing, eventually things break open. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, they don't. Because the system does not pay for effort. It pays for position. It pays for leverage. It pays for ownership. It pays for outcomes detached from hours. Hard work is only valuable when it's applied in the right direction. Otherwise, it just makes you tired faster. Let's break this down. In the early stages of life, hard work works. You study hard implies you get good grades. You work hard implies you get promoted. You show up consistently implies you get raises. This reinforces the belief that effort equals advancement. But then something strange happens. You reach a point where you're already working full days. You're already meeting expectations. You're already dependable. And no matter how much harder you work, nothing fundamentally changes. The raises get smaller. The promotions slow down. The ceiling gets closer. Not because you're failing, but because you've reached the effort ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day, only so much energy in a body, only so much productivity one person can produce. At that point, working harder doesn't create more freedom. It just deepens dependence. This is where the middle-class trap locks in. Because the harder you work, the more your lifestyle depends on you continuing to work that hard. You don't build escape velocity. You build fragility. Now let's confront a myth that keeps people stuck. If I just get paid more per hour, I'll be free. That sounds logical, but it hides the real problem. You're still trading time for money. You're just doing it at a higher rate, and time is the one resource you cannot scale. This is why so many high earners feel just as trapped as low earners. Different numbers, same structure, same dependence, same pressure, same fear of stopping. Now here's the uncomfortable sentence. Hard work makes you valuable. Leverage makes you free. And leverage is almost never taught to the middle class. Why? Because leverage reduces dependency on labor, and labor dependency keeps systems running. Now let's talk about what leverage actually is, because it's often misunderstood. Leverage is not working harder. It's not grinding more. It's not stacking more responsibilities. Leverage is when the same effort produces disproportionate results. One decision affecting many outcomes. One system producing ongoing value. One asset working while you don't. Leverage can look like ownership instead of employment, systems instead of tasks, equity instead of salary, processes instead of presence. But here's the catch. Leverage feels risky to people trained on hard work because hard work feels controllable. You show up, you do the thing, you get paid. Leverage feels uncertain, delayed, indirect, and uncertainty triggers fear. This is why so many people stay in effort-based lives. Effort feels safe, even when it's slowly exhausting you. Now let's address something important. Hard work is not useless. It's just incomplete. Hard work builds skills. Hard work builds discipline. Hard work builds reliability. Those are necessary foundations. But if you never transition from effort to leverage, those same traits become chains. You become too responsible to take risk, too committed to leave, too exhausted to build something new. That's the trap. You don't get stuck because you lack ambition. You get stuck because your ambition was trained to express itself only through effort. Now, let's talk about loyalty. The middle-class trap often disguises itself as loyalty. Loyalty to a company. Loyalty to a role. Loyalty to a path you already invested years in. And loyalty is admirable. But loyalty without ownership is just prolonged dependency. This is why so many people feel conflicted. They want more freedom, but they don't want to betray the life they built. They don't want to look ungrateful. They don't want to seem unrealistic. They don't want to start over, so they compromise. They tell themselves, this is just how it is. At least it's stable. I should be thankful. And gratitude becomes a gag. Not because gratitude is bad, but because it's used to silence curiosity. Now let me be clear. Escaping the middle-class trap does not mean abandoning hard work. It means redeploying it, using effort to build leverage, using discipline to create systems, using consistency to accumulate ownership. And that shift is the most uncomfortable transition of all because it requires letting go of the one thing you were praised for. Being the hardest worker in the room doesn't matter if you don't own the room. In the next chapter, we're going to expose the biggest reason people never make this shift. Fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of stepping outside the rules they were rewarded for following. Because the middle-class trap is enforced not by poverty, but by permission. And once you stop waiting for permission, everything changes. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. Chapter 4. Permission is the invisible prison. Most people don't realize they're waiting for approval, waiting for certainty, waiting for someone to say, now it's okay. And that waiting is the lock on the middle-class trap. Here is the brutal truth. The system does not stop you from leaving. It simply never gives you permission to try. And because you were trained to succeed within permission, stepping outside, it feels irresponsible, dangerous, reckless, immature. This is where most capable people freeze, not because they lack ideas, not because they lack intelligence, but because they were rewarded their entire lives for staying inside the lines. Good students follow instructions, good employees follow processes, good citizens follow rules, and following rules works until the rules stop leading anywhere new. Now, let's talk about fear, because this is where fear actually lives. Not fear of failure, fear of being seen as foolish, fear of explaining yourself, fear of disappointing people who believed in your safe path, fear of being wrong out loud. Middle-class fear is social, not physical. You're not afraid of starving. You're afraid of looking stupid. You're afraid of stepping off the script and discovering there is no applause. So you wait. You wait for a clearer plan. You wait for more savings. You wait for more confidence. You wait for more time. But time is not neutral. Time deepens commitments. Time raises stakes. Time makes starting over feel heavier. And one day, waiting becomes the decision. Now, let's expose a painful illusion. I'll make the leap when it feels safe. It never will, because safety is defined by the system you're trying to leave. If your benchmark for action is total certainty, you will never act. And the system knows this. That's why it rewards you with just enough comfort to make risk feel unnecessary. Now let's talk about responsibility. This is where the trap feels moral. You have bills. People depend on you. You can't be reckless. And that's true. But here's the uncomfortable counter-truth. Responsibility without autonomy is just managed obligation. You're not irresponsible for wanting more control over your life. You're not selfish for wanting leverage. You're not naive for questioning the structure. But the system frames questioning as immaturity. So you internalize it. You silence curiosity. You lower expectations. You optimize within the cage. Now, here's something rarely said out loud. The middle-class trap is enforced not by force, but by identity. You begin to see yourself as this kind of person, the stable one, the responsible one, the realistic one. And any thought that contradicts that identity feels like betrayal. So you dismiss it. This isn't for people like me. I'm not the type to do that. I missed my chance. Those sentences are not facts. They are self-enforced limits. Now let's talk about permission again. Who exactly are you waiting for? Your parents? Your boss? Your peers? Society? None of them will ever give it, because giving you permission would mean questioning their own choices. So permission never comes. Freedom begins the moment you realize this. That realization is not loud. It doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels destabilizing. Because if no one is coming to approve your move, then responsibility shifts fully onto you. And that's scary. But it's also the beginning of ownership. Ownership of direction. Ownership of risk. Ownership of outcomes. And ownership is the opposite of the middle-class trap. Now here's the pivot point. You don't escape by quitting tomorrow. You don't escape by blowing up your life. You don't escape by reckless action. You escape by changing how you think about risk. Because the biggest lie you were told is that staying where you are is safe. It's not. It's just familiar. And familiarity hides danger well. In the next chapter, we're going to redefine risk entirely, not as danger, but as exposure. Because once you understand what real risk actually is, you'll realize the middle-class trap is far riskier than anything you've been avoiding. And that realization changes everything. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 5. The real meaning of risk. Risk has been misdefined on purpose. You were taught that risk means instability, uncertainty, possibility of loss, so you were trained to avoid it, but that definition quietly protects the middle-class trap. Because here is the truth most people never hear. Avoiding risk is itself the biggest risk of all. Not dramatic risk, not reckless risk, but structural risk. The risk of tying your entire life to one income stream, one employer, one economic assumption. That is not safety. That is concentration, and concentration without control is fragility. The middle-class trap survives because it reframes risk emotionally. It teaches you to fear visible risk while ignoring invisible exposure. Now let's redefine risk properly. Risk is not uncertainty. Risk is lack of optionality. If you have options, uncertainty is manageable. If you don't, certainty can destroy you. Think about this. If your income stops tomorrow, what options activate automatically? Do you have systems, assets, alternate paths, or do you have anxiety? Most people in the middle class are one disruption away from panic. Not because they're irresponsible, but because they were trained to depend. Now, let's talk about employment risk. A job feels safe because it's familiar. But familiarity is not protection. A job concentrates risk in one place, one decision maker, one industry, one economy, one schedule. And when that structure cracks, you absorb all the impact. That's not low risk. That's delayed risk. Now compare that to someone with multiple income streams. Not overnight success, not flashy hustles, just diversified exposure, different skills, different sources, different timelines. That person faces uncertainty, but not collapse. This is why the wealthy tolerate volatility that terrifies the middle class. They don't eliminate risk. They distribute it. Now let's talk about the risk of stagnation. This is the quietest danger of all. When you stay too long in one role, one environment, one way of thinking, your skills stop compounding, your perspective narrows, your adaptability weakens. And adaptability is the real asset. The world changes faster than loyalty can protect you. Industries shift. Technology replaces roles. Economic cycles turn. And when change arrives, those who avoided all risk have the fewest options. This is why stability often collapses suddenly. It wasn't safe. It was just unchallenged. Now let's talk about social risk. Leaving the middle class trap often means being misunderstood. People will question you, minimize your goals, project their fears onto you. That social discomfort feels like danger, but it's not. It's transition. And transition always feels destabilizing before it becomes empowering. Now here's the most important distinction of all. There is a difference between intelligent risk and blind risk. Blind risk is gambling. Intelligent risk is building options. Blind risk ignores consequences. Intelligent risk prepares buffers. Blind risk bets everything. Intelligent risk experiments gradually. The middle class trap teaches you that all risk is blind. That's false. That belief keeps you frozen. Now, let's bring this home. You don't escape the middle class trap by taking one giant leap. You escape by slowly reducing dependency. You build skills that travel. You build assets that compound. You build systems that don't require presence. You replace certainty with resilience. And resilience is far safer than predictability. Now, here's the sentence that reframes everything. The goal is not to eliminate risk. The goal is to survive it without collapse. And the only way to do that is to stop concentrating your life into structures you don't control. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about money itself and why the middle class trap teaches you to use money in a way that keeps you working forever. Because money, when misunderstood, becomes another chain. And once you see how that happens, you'll understand why so many people earn more and feel poorer at the same time. If you appreciate our efforts and our thoughts, subscribe and like this video. We need to show the world that there are many people like us. We must always continue to improve. Chapter 6. How money keeps you running in place. The middle class is not underpaid. It's mistrained, not in how to earn money, but in how to use it. This is one of the most important chapters in this entire audiobook because it explains why people who earn more often feel more trapped than before. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The middle class is taught to use money in ways that permanently require more work. Money becomes fuel for obligations, not leverage for freedom. Let's break this down carefully. The moment your income increases, you're encouraged, quietly, socially, invisibly, to upgrade your life. Bigger space, better car, more convenience, higher standards. None of this is evil. None of it is reckless. That's why it's so effective. Each upgrade feels like progress. Each upgrade feels earned. But every upgrade increases fixed costs. And fixed costs are chains. The more fixed costs you carry, the fewer choices you have. This is why so many people earning good money feel like they can't breathe. They didn't overspend. They normalized. They normalized a lifestyle that demands constant income. And constant income demands constant labor. This is the engine of the middle class trap. Now let's talk about the most dangerous habit of all. Using money to reduce discomfort instead of increase leverage. When work is stressful, money is used for relief. Convenience food, impulse purchases, short-term pleasures, treat yourself moments. Again, reasonable, human, understandable, but over time, money becomes emotional anesthesia. Instead of solving the source of pressure, it numbs the symptoms. And numbing delays escape. Millionaire thinking uses money differently, not to escape discomfort, but to remove it at the source. Buying time, buying systems, buying flexibility. buying future calm. The middle class buys relief. The wealthy buy space. Now let's talk about debt, because this is where the trap tightens. Debt is sold as acceleration. Why wait? Enjoy now. You deserve it. And sometimes debt makes sense. But most middle-class debt is not strategic. It's emotional. It locks future labor to past decisions. It trades tomorrow's freedom for today's comfort. And the tragedy is this: debt makes you work for your past self. Every payment is yesterday reaching into today, demanding obedience. Now let's talk about saving, because even here the trap exists. The middle class is told to save responsibly. Emergency funds, retirement accounts, safe instruments. This is not wrong, but it's incomplete, because saving without leverage only extends survival. It does not create escape velocity. It protects you from disaster, but not from dependency. You survive longer inside the system. You don't leave it. Now here's the sentence most people never hear. Money used for consumption disappears. Money used for leverage multiplies. But leverage requires patience. And patience is uncomfortable in a system that trains you to measure success yearly. Now let's talk about the psychology behind this. The middle class is taught that money is for enjoyment after work. Work hard, then relax, then repeat. This trains a loop where work is permanent. Millionaire thinking flips the equation. It asks, how can money reduce the amount of work required in the future? That question is never asked in the middle class trap, because asking it threatens the system. Now let's talk about why people resist this shift. Because using money for leverage often looks boring. No status, no applause, no visible upgrade. It's invisible progress. And invisible progress is uncomfortable in a culture obsessed with appearances. So people spend visibly, even if it costs them freedom, invisibly. Now here's the hardest truth of this chapter. If your lifestyle requires your full attention, you do not own your life. Your life owns you. Now pause for a moment. Look at how your money flows, not how much you earn, but what your money forces you to do next. Does it create more options or more obligations? Does it reduce pressure or delay it? Those answers matter more than income, because income can lie. Lifestyle never does. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about identity and how the middle class trap rewires how you see yourself. Because once identity is locked, escape feels not just risky, but wrong. And that's the most powerful cage of all. Please like and subscribe if you want a better future for your children, your family, and yourself. It's very difficult to achieve success today, but I'm sure you'll succeed. All you have to do is learn and discover new things. Chapter 7. The identity that keeps you stuck. Long before money traps you, identity does. This is the chapter almost no one talks about because it's invisible. You don't feel trapped by identity. You feel defined by it. The middle class trap doesn't just control your income, it rewires how you see yourself. And once identity locks in, escape feels not just risky, but wrong. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people aren't stuck financially. They're stuck psychologically. They've learned who they are, the responsible one, the realistic one, the stable one, and those labels feel honorable, but they quietly set boundaries around possibility. Now let's talk about how this identity is formed. From early on, you were rewarded for being sensible. Don't dream too big. Don't rock the boat. Don't embarrass yourself. Play it safe. Be grateful. Stay in your lane. Over time, safe becomes who you are, and anything outside that lane feels like betrayal of your family, your upbringing, your past effort. This is why so many people self-sabotage right when opportunity appears, not consciously, internally. A voice whispers, "This isn't for people like you. Don't get ahead of yourself. Be realistic." That voice is not intuition. It's conditioning. The middle-class trap trains you to associate ambition with recklessness and stability with virtue. So when you consider change, your own identity pushes back. Now let's talk about something subtle. Identity is reinforced socially. Your environment expects consistency from you. When you change, it creates friction. People get uncomfortable, not because they hate you, but because your change threatens their certainty. So they joke, they question, they minimize. Must be nice. Don't forget where you came from. Just don't get crazy. And slowly you learn. Growth costs social comfort, so you limit yourself to stay accepted. This is one of the strongest forces on earth. Now here's the painful sentence. The middle-class trap survives because it gives you a respectable identity to protect. You're not failing. You're doing well. You're on track. You're lucky. Those compliments are cages. They make dissatisfaction feel ungrateful. So you silence it. Now let's talk about the identity shift that breaks the trap. Not from employee to entrepreneur. Not from broke to rich. Those are surface changes. The real shift is from dependent identity to builder identity. A dependent identity asks, what's expected of me? What's allowed? What's safe? A builder identity asks, what am I constructing? What systems outlive my effort? What increases my options? This shift is uncomfortable because builders don't get immediate validation. They look foolish early, uncertain, inconsistent, and middle-class identity hates looking foolish. It was trained to avoid embarrassment at all costs. Now let's talk about self-worth. In the middle-class trap, self-worth is tied to productivity. How busy you are, how responsible you are, how much you sacrifice. Rest feels guilty. Exploration feels irresponsible. Uncertainty feels dangerous. Builder identity separates worth from output. You are valuable even when building slowly, even when learning, even when experimenting. That separation is freeing and terrifying because it removes the familiar metrics. Now here's something important. You cannot escape the middle-class trap while trying to preserve the identity it gave you. One must go. You can keep the structure or you can keep the identity, not both. This doesn't mean rejecting who you were. It means outgrowing it. And outgrowing something always feels like loss before it feels like expansion. Now, let's talk about why people retreat. They glimpse a different future. They feel excitement. Then fear. Not fear of failure. Fear of becoming someone unfamiliar. Fear of no longer fitting. Fear of standing alone. Fear of not being recognized. So they return to what's known. The trap welcomes them back warmly, with routine, with praise, with comfort, and the cycle continues. Now pause. Ask yourself honestly, who would you disappoint if you fully pursued autonomy? That answer matters, because until you confront it, you will keep choosing safety over freedom. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the quiet rebellion that actually breaks the middle-class trap. Not quitting, not announcing, not dramatic change, but something far more dangerous to the system, strategic independence. And once you understand how that works, you'll realize escape doesn't require destruction, just redesign. Friend, write your opinion on this topic in the comments. Do you agree with us or not? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Chapter 8. Strategic Independence. Most people think escape requires a dramatic move. Quit the job, burn the bridge, go all in. That belief keeps them trapped because drama feels dangerous, and danger reinforces the need for permission. The middle-class trap is not broken by rebellion. It's broken by quiet independence. Strategic independence is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten stability up front. That's why it works. Here is the core idea. You don't leave the system by rejecting it. You leave by slowly becoming unnecessary to it. That shift changes everything. Now let's define strategic independence properly. It is the deliberate reduction of dependency without self-sabotage, not impulsive risk, not reckless abandonment, calculated distance. You don't quit income. You diversify it. You don't abandon stability. You outgrow it. You don't reject your current life. You build the next one alongside it. This approach terrifies the system because it's invisible until it's complete. Now let's talk about why people resist this. Because strategic independence requires patience, and patience doesn't get applause. There are no announcements, no instant rewards, no external validation. It feels slow, unimpressive, lonely, but slow independence is far safer than fast dependence. Now, let's talk about the first pillar, portable value. The middle class is trained to be valuable in one place, one company, one role, one context. Strategic independence builds value that travels, skills that apply across industries, knowledge that compounds regardless of employer, capabilities that don't expire when a role ends. Portable value reduces fear. When you know you can adapt, uncertainty loses its edge. Now the second pillar, asymmetric effort. In the middle-class trap, effort is linear. More hours implies slightly more money. Strategic independence focuses on effort that continues paying after it's done. Systems, processes, assets, reusable work. This is why the early phase feels unrewarding. You're working twice. Once for today, once for the future. Most people stop here. They call it burnout. They call it unrealistic. They call it unsustainable. But the truth is simpler. They weren't trained to delay validation. Now the third pillar, optional income. Not quitting your job, not replacing it overnight, but building income that is not required at first. Optional income reduces pressure. Pressure is the enemy of good decisions. When income is optional, you can experiment without panic. You can walk away from bad deals. You can say no. You can wait. This is how leverage grows quietly. Now let's address a myth. You need to be entrepreneurial. No. You need to be independent in thinking. Entrepreneurship is one path, not the only one. Strategic independence exists inside jobs, between jobs, alongside jobs. It's not a role. It's a mindset. Now let's talk about time. Strategic independence is built in margins, evenings, weekends, small pockets of focus, not grinding endlessly, but intentionally allocating energy toward escape velocity. This is where most people fail. Not because they lack time, because they spend margins on recovery instead of construction. They're exhausted from maintaining life, so they use free time to numb, not to build. That's understandable, but it delays freedom indefinitely. Now here's a difficult truth. You don't escape the middle-class trap by demanding less work. You escape by demanding more ownership. Ownership of outcomes, ownership of learning, ownership of direction. That ownership begins before money changes. It begins with how you allocate attention. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, if nothing changed externally for the next 5 years. But you built quiet independence internally. Where would you be? That question matters because the middle class trap thrives when all progress is external. Promotions, raises, titles. Strategic independence grows internally first. Skills, systems, confidence, options, and when external change arrives, you're ready. Now here's the most important thing to understand. Strategic independence does not require permission. That's why it works. No announcement, no approval, no justification, just consistent construction. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about patience, not the motivational kind, but the structural patience required to outlast the middle class trap. Because escape is not fast, but it is inevitable when built correctly. Hang on a sec. Hey there, dear viewers. Write in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in the next video. We promise to read all the comments and pick the best and most relevant topics. Thanks. Chapter 9. The Patience Gap that keeps people trapped. The middle class trap doesn't break people quickly. It wears them down slowly. And the mechanism is not effort. It's time perception. Here is the brutal truth. Most people are patient with comfort and impatient with freedom. They will tolerate decades of predictability, but abandon escape plans after months of slow progress. That imbalance keeps the trap intact. Because strategic independence requires a kind of patience most people were never taught to develop. Not passive patience, not hopeful waiting, but structural patience. The patience to build without validation, to continue without applause, to work on things that don't pay immediately. This is where the middle-class mindset collapses, because it was trained on short feedback loops. You work arrow, you get paid. You perform arrow, you get reviewed. You comply implies, you get rewarded. Fast signals, clear markers, immediate reassurance. Strategic independence removes those signals. And without signals, most people panic. They assume nothing is working. They assume they're behind. They assume they made a mistake, so they quit. Not because they were wrong, but because they expected results on the system's timeline. Now let's talk about timelines honestly. The middle class trap conditions you to think in years. Annual raises, yearly reviews, 5-year plans, 30-year careers. But escape does not operate on institutional timelines. It operates on compounding timelines. Small progress at first, invisible progress early, sudden acceleration later. And because early progress feels unimpressive, most people abandon it before it becomes visible. This is why you hear stories that sound like luck. Overnight success, sudden breakthrough, it just took off. Those stories hide the years of quiet construction underneath. Years without praise, years without certainty, years where nothing looked impressive. That's the patience gap. Now let's talk about boredom, because boredom is the real enemy. The middle class trap keeps you stimulated. Deadlines, meetings, emails, tasks. You're constantly busy. Busy feels productive. Busy feels necessary. Busy feels important. Strategic independence feels boring by comparison. Repetition, learning, building systems, practicing skills, refining processes. No urgency, no adrenaline, no external pressure. Just quiet work. And quiet work feels uncomfortable to people conditioned on constant stimulation. So they return to busyness. Not because busyness works, but because it feels familiar. Now let's talk about the emotional cycle. You start building something. You feel motivated. You imagine freedom. Then progress slows. Doubt appears. energy drops. This is the moment that decides everything. Middle-class thinking says, this is taking too long. This isn't realistic. I should focus on what's stable. Builder thinking says, this phase was expected. This is where compounding is stored. This is where most people quit. And that awareness keeps them moving. Now here's a sentence that should recalibrate you. If your plan doesn't feel boring at times, it probably won't work long term. Sustainable systems are not exciting. They are reliable. Reliability is what breaks dependency. Now let's talk about delayed identity. Strategic independence requires you to act like the person you're becoming before the results confirm it. You build like an owner before you feel like one. You think long-term before you're rewarded for it. That mismatch creates discomfort. You look the same externally, but internally, everything is shifting. This is why people feel lonely during transition. They no longer fully belong to the old system, but haven't arrived at the new one yet. That in-between space is uncomfortable, and discomfort sends many people back. Now let's be clear. Patience does not mean waiting blindly. It means tracking the right metrics, not money yet, not recognition, not status, but skill acquisition, reduced dependency, increased optionality, improved decision quality. Those metrics change long before income does. And if those are improving, progress is happening, even if it's invisible. Now, here's the hardest truth of this chapter. The middle-class trap survives because it rewards impatience with immediate comfort. Escape requires patience that delays comfort for structural freedom. That trade feels unfair. But unfair does not mean wrong. It means rare, and rarity is where leverage lives. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about comparison, the silent force that pulls people back into the trap just as they're about to outgrow it. Because comparison doesn't just waste energy, it rewrites goals. And once your goals are rewritten, you end up running someone else's race, right back into the system you wanted to leave. Chapter 10. Comparison, the invisible reset button. Comparison doesn't just steal joy, it resets direction. And that's why it's one of the most powerful forces keeping people inside the middle-class trap. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't quit building freedom because it's hard. They quit because someone else looks further ahead. Comparison quietly reprograms your goals. You start measuring progress not by reduced dependency, but by how you look relative to others. And the moment that happens, you're back inside the system. Because the system thrives on comparison, titles, salaries, homes, cars, milestones, all easily comparable, all externally visible, all misleading. The middle-class trap keeps you focused sideways, so you never look forward. Now let's talk about how comparison actually works. It rarely compares beginnings to beginnings. You compare your middle to someone else's highlight reel. You compare your quiet construction to someone else's visible outcome. And that comparison creates impatience. Impatience demands proof. Proof demands speed. Speed destroys systems. So people abandon slow, independent paths and return to familiar metrics, raises, promotions, status. The trap welcomes them back. Now let's talk about why comparison is especially dangerous during transition. When you're building strategic independence, progress is internal first. Skills before income, options before freedom, confidence before leverage. None of this is visible, so externally it looks like nothing is happening. Meanwhile, the people around you appear to be advancing. New job titles, new purchases, new announcements. And comparison whispers, you're falling behind. But behind what? someone else's structure, someone else's priorities, someone else's constraints? Here's the sentence that breaks comparison. Progress is not universal. It is contextual. Advancing inside the system is not the same as advancing away from dependency. But comparison ignores context. It reduces everything to surface metrics, and surface metrics keep you trapped. Now let's talk about social pressure. Comparison doesn't just happen internally, it's reinforced socially. Questions like, so what's next for you? Any promotions coming? Why haven't you upgraded yet? These questions are not malicious. They are system-generated. They assume the same path, the same ladder, the same goals. And if you don't have a conventional answer, you feel behind, even if you're building something far more powerful. This is why so many people abandon independence right before it compounds. Not because they were wrong, because they felt out of sync. Now let's talk about the psychological cost. Comparison creates urgency. Urgency creates shortcuts. Shortcuts recreate dependency. This is why people jump into bad investments, overextend financially, accept roles they don't want. They're trying to close a comparison gap that never mattered in the first place. Now here's a hard truth. If you use someone else's milestones to measure your progress, you will always feel late because their path is not designed to deliver what you want. Now let's reframe comparison correctly. Comparison is useful only in one direction, backward. Compare yourself to who you were last year. Less dependent, more skilled, more optional, more patient. If yes, progress is happening. If no, adjust. That's it. No sideways comparison required. Now, let's talk about envy. Envy is not bad. It's information. It reveals what you think you want. But here's the question envy never asks. What does that person have to maintain to keep what I'm admiring? Every visible success has invisible pressure. Mortgages, expectations, schedules, obligations. Comparison ignores those costs. Builder thinking includes them. Now let's bring this back to the middle-class trap. The trap survives because comparison keeps people aligned. Aligned with peers, aligned with expectations, aligned with timelines they didn't choose. Strategic independence requires misalignment. You will look behind before you leap ahead. That phase is unavoidable. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. If you don't control how you measure progress, the system will do it for you. And the system measures what keeps you dependent. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about time and how the middle-class trap trains you to spend your best years optimizing safety instead of building freedom. Because time is the one asset that never recovers from misallocation. And once you understand how time is really used, your priorities will rearrange themselves permanently. Chapter 11. How time is quietly stolen. Time is the only asset that never compounds once it's gone. Money can return. Skills can be rebuilt. Opportunities can reappear. Time does not. And yet the middle-class trap is designed to consume time in ways that feel productive, but delay freedom indefinitely. Here's the brutal truth. The middle class is not wasting time. It is misallocating it. Not on laziness, not on indulgence, on maintenance, maintaining income, maintaining lifestyle, maintaining expectations, maintaining appearances. Years go by, maintaining something that was never designed to grow beyond survival. Now let's talk about how this happens. The system trains you to think in slices of time. Workdays, weekends, vacations, retirement. Life is segmented. You trade your most energetic years for the promise of rest later. You tell yourself, I'll enjoy life once I'm more secure. I'll take risks later. I'll slow down eventually, but eventually keeps moving. Responsibilities increase. Commitments multiply. Flexibility disappears. And before you realize it, the window for asymmetrical effort closes. Now here's the sentence no one wants to hear. The best years for building leverage are the years most people spend optimizing comfort. Energy is highest early. Risk tolerance is higher. Recovery is faster. Yet those years are often spent climbing predictable ladders, locking into long-term expenses, committing to structures that demand permanence. By the time dissatisfaction peaks, the cost of change feels unbearable. This is not accidental. Now let's talk about how time is psychologically framed. The middle-class trap trains urgency for small things and patience for big ones. Urgency for emails, urgency for deadlines, urgency for meetings, patience for freedom, patience for autonomy, patience for life you actually want. This inversion keeps people busy, but never advancing structurally. Now, let's talk about weekends. Weekends are sold as recovery, rest, escape, distraction, and rest is necessary. But here's the problem. If your entire week exhausts you, your weekend will be spent restoring, not building. So weeks become maintenance cycles. You work to recover. You recover to work. And years disappear. Builder thinking reframes time differently. It asks, how much time is required to maintain my life? How much time can be redirected toward building options? This is not about grinding nonstop. It's about protecting small blocks of high-quality time. Time for learning, time for systems, time for experimentation, even a few hours a week. Used consistently, compound dramatically, but only if they're protected. Now let's talk about distraction, because this is how time is stolen silently. Phones, feeds, notifications, endless content. Not inherently bad, but they fragment attention. Fragmented attention prevents deep thinking. Deep thinking is required to escape structural traps. So people stay reactive, responding instead of designing, consuming instead of constructing, and distraction feels harmless. Until you realize it consumed years. Now let's talk about the lie of later. Later is comforting. Later feels responsible. Later postpones discomfort. But later is where ambition goes to sleep. You don't need more time. You need reallocated attention. Now, let's be clear. Escaping the middle-class trap does not require sacrificing your entire life. It requires redirecting a fraction of it. The difference between trapped and free is often not effort, but focus. Now, here's the hardest truth of this chapter. If you spend your best hours maintaining your life, you will never build a better one. Maintenance is endless. Building is finite. Eventually, systems replace effort. Assets replace hours. Leverage replaces labor. But only if time is invested early. Now pause. Ask yourself, where does your best mental energy go? To survival or to construction? That answer predicts your future more accurately than income ever will. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about education. Not formal schooling, but the kind of learning that actually breaks the middle-class trap. Because most people are educated enough to earn, but not educated enough to escape. And that gap is not accidental. Chapter 12. Education that keeps you dependent. You were educated to succeed, but not to escape. That sentence alone explains more than most degrees ever will. Here's the brutal truth. The education system prepares you to function inside the system, not to outgrow it. It teaches you how to follow instructions, how to meet requirements, how to be evaluated, how to qualify. It does not teach you how to build leverage, how to design systems, how to think in outcomes instead of tasks. And because you performed well inside that structure, you assumed the structure would eventually reward you. It rarely does. Now let's be clear. This is not an attack on learning. Knowledge is power, but what you learn and why determines where that power leads. The middle class trap is reinforced by an education that optimizes employability, not autonomy. You learn to ask, what's the right answer? What will be on the test? What do they want from me? Those questions are useful until you need to create something new. Because builders ask different questions. What problem exists? What system solves it? What repeats without my presence? Those questions are rarely taught. Now let's talk about credentials. Credentials feel like progress, degrees, certifications, titles, and sometimes they are. But credentials often create a false sense of advancement. You feel safer, more qualified, more legitimate. But legitimacy inside a system is not the same as leverage outside it. Many people accumulate credentials instead of capability. They stay in classrooms longer because classrooms feel predictable. Grades feel familiar, feedback is structured, progress is measured. But real-world leverage does not offer syllabi. It offers ambiguity. And ambiguity scares people trained on clear instructions. Now let's talk about the most dangerous educational lie of all. If you just learn more, you'll be free. Learning without application creates intellectual comfort, not freedom. Freedom requires implementation under uncertainty. That means making decisions without guaranteed outcomes. That skill is rarely taught because it cannot be standardized. Now let's talk about self-education, because this is where the gap widens. The middle class consumes information passively. Podcasts, videos, articles. They feel productive. They feel motivating. But consumption without synthesis creates the illusion of progress. Builder education is different. It is targeted. It is applied. It is uncomfortable. Builders learn with intent to solve a problem, to create value, to reduce dependency. They learn just enough, then test. They don't wait to feel ready. They don't seek mastery before action. They seek feedback. Now let's talk about something subtle. The middle class trap teaches you that being educated means being correct. Builders care less about being correct and more about being effective. They expect mistakes. They expect revision. They expect discomfort. This mindset shift alone separates builders from dependents. Now let's address a sensitive point. Many people stay stuck because education became identity. I'm a professional, I'm qualified, I'm trained, and stepping outside that identity feels like regression. But identity should support growth, not prevent it. Now let's talk about learning velocity. In the middle class trap, learning is front-loaded. You study first, then you work. In builder mode, learning is continuous. Learn, arrow, apply, arrow, adjust, arrow, repeat. This loop compounds faster than formal education ever could. Now here's the hardest truth of this chapter. If your education does not reduce dependency, it is incomplete. It may increase income, it may increase status, it may increase confidence, but if it does not increase autonomy, it has served the system more than it has served you. Now pause. Ask yourself, what am I currently learning? And what dependency does it reduce? That question alone will restructure your priorities. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about goals. and why the goals most people chase actually lock them deeper into the middle class trap. Because goals, when poorly designed, become beautifully decorated cages. And once you see how that happens, you'll never set goals the same way again. Chapter 13. Goals that keep you stuck. Goals are supposed to move you forward, but most people are chasing goals that quietly lock them in place. Here's the brutal truth. The wrong goals don't motivate you, they trap you. Not because they're bad, because they're inherited. The middle class trap is reinforced by goals that look successful but deepen dependency. Let's talk about the most common ones. Get a better job, earn a higher salary, buy a bigger house, upgrade my lifestyle. Each of these sounds reasonable. Each of these feels like progress. And each of them, if pursued without leverage, tightens the cage. Why? Because they increase responsibility faster than they increase freedom. A higher salary with higher expenses doesn't buy autonomy. It buys maintenance. Now let's talk about the psychology behind goal setting. The middle class is trained to set status goals, visible milestones, externally validated achievements, things other people can recognize, titles, income brackets, possessions. Status goals feel motivating because they come with applause. But applause is expensive. It often requires conformity, consistency, staying inside expectations. Builder thinking sets structural goals, goals that don't look impressive early, but radically change life later, reducing dependency, increasing optionality, building systems, creating a symmetry. These goals don't get applause, they get silence. That silence scares people, so they abandon structural goals and return to status goals. Now let's talk about why goals fail so often. Because they focus on outcomes, not constraints. I want to earn more. I want to be free. I want more time. Those desires are vague. Builder goals focus on constraints removal. What prevents freedom? What creates pressure? What locks my time? Remove constraints and outcomes follow naturally. Now let's talk about one of the most dangerous goals of all, stability. Stability feels mature, responsible, wise. But stability without adaptability becomes fragility. The goal of pure stability encourages avoidance of risk, experimentation, and growth. It rewards predictability over resilience. And resilience is what survives change. Now let's talk about retirement goals. Retirement is sold as freedom. Work hard now, relax later. But this creates a tragic inversion. You spend your healthiest years deferring life. And by the time later arrives, energy has declined and options have narrowed. Builder thinking does not postpone life. It integrates freedom earlier, even if imperfectly. Now let's talk about goal timelines. The middle class trap trains you to think linearly, 5-year plans, 10-year careers, 30-year paths. Builders think in phases, build skills, build systems, build leverage, then scale. Each phase has different goals, different metrics, different priorities. This flexibility prevents stagnation. Now here's the most important distinction. Goals should reduce pressure, not increase it. If a goal requires more hours, more stress, more dependency, it's not a freedom goal, it's a prestige goal. Prestige is not freedom. Now pause. Ask yourself, if I achieved my current goals, would my life require less effort or just look better? That answer reveals everything. Now let's talk about fear-driven goals. Some goals are not chosen, they're reactions. I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to look unsuccessful. I don't want to struggle. Fear-based goals optimize avoidance, not creation. They keep you aligned with the group, but disconnected from yourself. Builder goals are values-driven. They align with how you want to live, not how you want to appear. Now here's the hardest truth of this chapter. If your goals don't challenge the structure you're in, they will reinforce it. You don't escape the middle-class trap by winning inside it. You escape by designing beyond it. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about work, not effort, but how work itself is structured to keep capable people dependent. Because once you understand how work is actually valued, you'll stop trying to win games that were never designed for you to leave. Chapter 14, How Work Was Designed to Keep You Dependent. Work itself is not the enemy, but the way it is structured is the backbone of the middle-class trap. Here is the brutal truth. Most jobs are designed to extract value, not to build independence. They reward reliability, they reward availability, they reward obedience. They do not reward autonomy. And because the rewards feel fair, the structure goes unquestioned. Now let's talk about how work is actually valued. You are not paid for effort. You are not paid for loyalty. You are not paid for potential. You are paid for replaceability. The easier it is to replace you, the more the system dictates your terms. The middle class is trained to increase usefulness, but not uniqueness. You become excellent at your role, but dependent on the role's existence. That's the trade. Now let's talk about specialization, because this is where many people misunderstand value. Specialization can increase income, but narrow specialization can increase fragility. If your skill only works in one company, one industry, one context, you don't own the skill. The context does. Builder thinking aims for transferable leverage, skills that apply across markets, knowledge that compounds independently, capabilities that scale beyond location. Now let's talk about promotions. Promotions feel like progress. More pay, more responsibility, more status. But often, promotions increase surface authority without increasing structural power. You manage more people, but still don't own outcomes. You handle bigger budgets, but don't control direction. You attend more meetings, but have less time to think. This is how people climb and feel more trapped than before. Now let's talk about performance. High performers are rewarded, but also contained. They become critical, too valuable to move, too important to lose, and the better you perform, the harder it becomes to leave. This is the loyalty paradox. Excellence increases dependence unless paired with leverage. Now let's talk about time again. Jobs rent your best hours, your clearest thinking, your strongest energy, your most focused attention, and what's left at the end of the day is used for recovery, not construction. This is not accidental, it's efficient. But it means escape must be intentional. Now here's something most people never admit. Work gives you just enough autonomy to tolerate dependency. You can choose how to complete tasks, but not whether they matter. You can optimize within boundaries, but not redesign the system. This keeps capable people busy, but not powerful. Now it becomes harder, not because you're less capable, but because misaligned pressure has stacked up. Now here's a critical insight. Pressure reveals who owns your life. If pressure always comes from outside, you are dependent. If pressure increasingly comes from choices you made, you are becoming free. Now pause. Think about your current stress. Does it build something, or does it just demand endurance? That answer tells you which direction you're moving. Now, let's talk about relief. Middle-class thinking seeks relief from pressure. Ownership thinking seeks alignment of pressure. Relief is temporary. Alignment is permanent. When pressure serves your long-term goals, it becomes meaningful. Meaning sustains effort far longer than comfort ever could. Now here's the hardest truth of this chapter. If you are always trying to reduce pressure, you will never build anything that lasts. The goal is not less pressure. The goal is pressure that compounds in your favor. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about discipline, not motivation, not hustle, but the quiet discipline required to stay on the ownership path when no one is watching and nothing is happening yet. Because most people don't fail loudly. They drift quietly, and discipline is what stops the drift. Chapter 17, Discipline Without Drama. Most people think discipline looks like intensity. Early mornings, hard speeches, relentless drive. That image is comforting because it feels heroic, but it's misleading. The discipline that breaks the middle-class trap is not dramatic. It's quiet, unseen, uncelebrated, and that's why most people never develop it. Here is the brutal truth. Motivation starts journeys, discipline finishes them. And discipline does not feel inspiring. It feels repetitive, unexciting, sometimes pointless. That's why it works. Now let's talk about how discipline is misunderstood. The middle-class trap teaches you to be disciplined when supervised. Deadlines enforce discipline, managers enforce discipline, consequences enforce discipline, remove supervision, and discipline collapses. Ownership removes supervision. No one checks in. No one reminds you. No one punishes delay. This is where most people drift, not because they don't care, but because they were never trained to self-regulate without external pressure. Now let's talk about drift. Drift is subtle. You don't quit, you don't fail, you just postpone. You miss a week, then another, then momentum disappears. And because nothing explodes, you convince yourself it's fine. But drift compounds silently, just like leverage does, only in the opposite direction. Now let's talk about the discipline that actually matters. Not grinding harder, not doing more, but showing up consistently when there is no immediate reward. That is the dividing line. The middle-class trap rewards visible effort. Ownership rewards invisible consistency. Now let's talk about habits. Most people try to change their lives with heroic bursts of effort. They burn out, they retreat, they repeat. Builder discipline is smaller, unimpressive, repeatable, sustainable. It asks, what can I do even on bad days? That's the habit that compounds. Now, let's talk about identity again, because discipline is tied to self-image. If you see yourself as someone who tries, discipline will always feel optional. If you see yourself as someone who keeps promises to yourself, discipline becomes automatic. This shift is subtle but powerful. You stop negotiating. You stop debating. You just act. Now let's talk about discomfort. Discipline is not about forcing yourself through pain. It's about tolerating boredom. Boredom is where most people quit. No excitement, no novelty, no feedback, just repetition. That's where builders separate. Now let's talk about time horizons again. Discipline is easier when your time horizon is long. If you expect results next month, every delay feels like failure. If you expect results in years, delays feel normal. Builder discipline assumes slowness. It plans for it. Now here's the hardest truth of this chapter. You don't need more discipline. You need fewer decisions. Decisions drain energy. Habits conserve it. Remove choice. Automate behavior. Reduce friction. That's real discipline. Now pause. Ask yourself, what am I relying on motivation for that should be a system? That question alone can change your trajectory. Now let's bring this back to the middle class trap. The trap survives because discipline is externally enforced. When enforcement disappears, so does progress. Ownership requires internal discipline, or nothing moves. That's why escape feels lonely. No one is watching. No one is applauding. No one is reminding you why you started. That's the test. And most people fail it quietly. Now here's the final insight of this chapter. If you can stay consistent when nothing is happening, you are unstoppable when something finally does. Because by then, your discipline is automatic and momentum is on your side. In the next chapter, we're going to bring everything together, not with motivation, not with hype, but with a clear picture of what life looks like on the other side of the middle class trap. Not fantasy, not perfection, but freedom that actually works. Chapter 18, Life on the Other Side of the Trap. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. There is no dramatic moment, no sudden applause, no instant transformation. That's what surprises people most. The middle class trap ends quietly. One day, you notice you're not anxious anymore, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing feels fragile. Your decisions feel slower, calmer, more deliberate. You don't rush. You don't panic. You don't explain yourself, because you're no longer reacting to pressure. You're directing it. This is what life looks like on the other side of the trap. Not luxury, not excess, but control. Control over time, control over attention, control over direction. Now let's be very clear. This is not a life without work. It's a life where work finally makes sense. You work on things that compound. You invest effort where it multiplies. You stop trading energy for maintenance alone. Your days feel lighter, even when they're full, because effort builds something that lasts. Now let's talk about money again, because this is where expectations break. Money stops being emotional. It no longer represents security or fear. It becomes a tool, a signal, a resource, a lever. You don't obsess over it because your life no longer collapses without it. That's the paradox. Money matters most when you have the least control. Now let's talk about identity again. On the other side of the trap, you stop introducing yourself by your role. You don't need the label. Your sense of self is internal, not granted by institutions. That internal stability is more powerful than any title. Now let's talk about comparison one last time. You still see what others are doing, but it doesn't pull you sideways anymore because you're no longer running a shared race. Your metrics are different. Optionality, resilience, alignment, calm. Those don't show up on social media, but they show up in your nervous system. Now let's talk about fear again. Fear doesn't disappear, but it changes shape. It's no longer fear of collapse. It's fear of wasting opportunity. That fear sharpens focus. It doesn't paralyze. Now let's talk about regret. On the other side of the trap, regret is quieter, not because everything went perfectly, but because you acted when you knew you should. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't ignore discomfort. You didn't trade decades for convenience. That matters more than outcomes. Now let's talk about time again. Time slows down, not because there's less to do, but because you're no longer rushing toward relief. You're building toward sustainability, and sustainability feels calm. Now here's the final truth of this audiobook. The middle class trap was never about money. It was about dependency. Money was just the mechanism. And escape was never about rebellion. It was about redesign. Quiet, patient, intentional. If you're listening to this and something inside you has shifted, pay attention. That's not motivation. That's recognition. Recognition of a life that no longer fits inside old structures. If this audiobook resonated with you, take a moment, not to rush, not to announce, but to decide one thing you will quietly build over the next year. Just one. If this helped you see your life more clearly, leave a comment with the line that hit you hardest. Subscribe, not for motivation, but for accountability. And if you know someone who's doing everything right but still feels stuck, share this with them. Sometimes all it takes is hearing the truth at the right time. Tell us what topic you want the next audiobook to explore, because once you see the trap, you don't unsee it. And once you step outside it, you never think the same way again. This is not the end. It's the redesign.